The search for missing Dandora human rights activist Caroline Mwatha ended this evening after she was found dead. In a bizarre twist, police now say the human rights defender died from a botched abortion. But as Enoch Sikoli reports, both the family and fellow human rights activists have rejected that claim and are calling for an independent autopsy.
Picture this: a young woman and human rights researcher balancing diapers with death-defying courage as she documented police brutality in Nairobi's slums. But when an unlicensed clinic became her last stop, her tragedy exposed the deadly gap between law and life. In this episode, we'll trace the legal twists, interrogate the forensic facts, and confront the system that let her fall through the cracks. Today on Dark Echoes, we unravel the haunting story of Caroline Mwatha, a fearless community warrior whose life was cut short by the shadowy perils of backstreet abortion. If you're into this kind of deep dives, smash that subscribe button, hit like, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation alive. If you also have cases you want deep dives on, write in the comments section below. Caroline Mwatha Ochieng, born in the early 1980s on the shore of Asembo Bay in Siaya County, embodied the fierce compassion of a community matriarch and the analytical rigor of a seasoned researcher, forging her path from humble rural beginnings to become one of Nairobi's most relentless human rights defenders. From her earliest days, she demonstrated an uncanny ability to mediate conflict among friends and families, earning her the affectionate moniker Carol Mtetezi, the backbone, long before she would take on the heavy responsibility of documenting state violence. After marrying Joshua Ochieng and welcoming 2 children into her home, she refused to confine herself to domestic spheres. Instead, she balanced the joy and demands of motherhood with an unyielding drive to challenge systematic injustice. When police brutality and extrajudicial killings began escalating in Nairobi's informal settlements, Caroline crystallized her vision for grassroots change by co-founding the Dandora Community Justice Center, a modest office in one of the city's most densely populated slums that would become a beacon of hope for the voiceless. There, she combined meticulous fieldwork, interviewing witnesses, cataloging incidents of abuse, photographing evidence, and compiling detailed reports for oversight bodies with warm, empathetic presence that made victims and their family feel safe enough to speak their truth. Eschewing confrontation for collaboration, she brokered the release of hundreds of youths detained without charge, convened regular community forums that turned local grievances into strategic campaigns, and forged alliance with national and international NGOs from the Independent Medical Legal Units to Amnesty International to ensure that each documented case had a chance of reaching sympathetic ears in high places. Caroline's approach was grounded in the principle of nonviolent resistance. She insisted that the fight for human dignity required moral clarity and disciplined persistence rather than incendiary rhetoric or physical force. She mentored scores of young activists, teaching them how to use legal frameworks, media engagement, and peaceful protest to hold the powerful accountable, thus planting the seeds for the next generation to carry the torch. Beneath her professional poise lays a poet's heart. She wrote eloquent briefings and impassioned opinion pieces, weaving statistics and human stories into narrative that cut through bureaucratic indifference and capture the public imaginations. Yet she was equally comfortable crouching in dusty alleyways, consoling a grieving mother or guiding a terrified teenager through police station corridors. For Caroline, transparency in governance was non-negotiable. Community empowerment was the only path to lasting reforms. And every young person she inspired was a testament to the power of collective actions. In an era when many activists succumbed to burnout or co-optation, she remained unflinchingly true to her ideals, refusing lucrative offers that would compromise her integrity and instead embracing the precarious life of grassroots researcher who often faced threats to her work. Though her life was tragically cut short, the murals that now adorn the walls of Dandora Center, vibrant portraits of her calm, determined gaze, serve as enduring reminders that one person's resolves can ripple outward, transforming despair into dignity. Caroline Mwatha was not merely a documenter of injustice, she was its antithesis, a living testament to the belief that ordinary citizens, united by empathy and equipped with truth, can bend the arc of history towards justice. Officially, Caroline Mwatha's death was tragic outcome of severe hemorrhage caused by perforation of her uterus during an unsafe abortion procedure. A post-mortem examination conducted by government pathologists concluded that the primary mechanism of death was exsanguination, that is, fatal blood loss resulting from a uterine rupture. The autopsy report detailed an approximately 5 to 6 months male fetus whose remains bore evidence of traumatic dismemberment and skull damage, consistent with the use of non-medical instruments in a clandestine setting. The pathologist's findings were stark. The posterior wall of Caroline's uterus had been perforated, creating an open wound through which blood escaped both internally into her abdominal cavity and externally through her birth canal. The volume of hemorrhage was sufficient to cause hypovolemic shock, in which the heart and brain become starved of oxygen-carrying blood, quickly leading to loss of consciousness and death if not immediately treated. In this case, the intervention came too late, as by the time Caroline was admitted to the mortuary under fictitious name, she had already succumbed to the massive blood loss. In addition to the uterine rupture, the autopsy noted multiple puncture marks in her abdomen, consistent with attempt of staunch bleeding or deliver the fetus, but identified no bruises, lacerations, or other signs of physical assault or defensive wounds. This absence of external trauma beyond the abortion-related injuries led the officials to rule out homicide by conventional violence. A neck abrasion observed during the autopsy was later attributed to the embalming process rather than antemortem strangulation or assault. The forensic team also examined the remains of the fetus and documented that one hand was missing and that the skull exhibited fractures. These findings pointed to the use of sharp instruments, likely makeshift or unsterilized, underscoring the unsafe nature of the procedure. Such botched abortion carry a high risk of organ perforation, infection, and uncontrolled bleeding complications that, in Kenya's restrictive legal environment, too often fatal of women seeking clandestine services. Despite the official determination, Caroline's family and members of the human rights community have vocally challenged the medical narrative. They argue that her body bore subtle wounds inconsistent with the abortion account and question why her cell phone remained active after the date of her presumed death. Their skepticism has fueled calls for an independent autopsy and broader inquiry, though no public report has yet overturned the government's conclusion. The continuing debate highlights how medical findings, while technically definitive, can become entangled with issues of trust in institutions and the rights of women to safe reproductive health care. Ultimately, the official recorded cause of death remains hemorrhage from a ruptured uterus incurred during a clandestine abortion procedure. This case has since become a rallying point for activists advocating for legal reform to reduce maternal mortality, as it underscores the deadly risk posed by unsafe abortions where access to regulated service is limited. Caroline Mwatha's death thus stands not only as a personal tragedy, but also as a public health reminder of the imperative to safeguard women's lives through accessible and safe reproductive health care. Caroline Mwatha and Alexander Gitau Gikonyo did maintain a clandestine romantic relationship. Text messages recovered by police show her addressing him with endearments, "Love you, miss you," and updating him on post-procedure symptoms. while he transferred 6,000 Kenya shillings towards the abortion at the unlicensed New Njiru Community Center in Dandora Phase 1. These messages confirm not only the affair but also his financial role in arranging the procedure. Yet affectionate banter and payment do not in their own amount to malice or intent to harm. For an affair-turned-violent scenario to hold water, we'd expect signs of coercion, threats or sudden emotional rupture, but neither the forensic nor testimonial record reveals any such indicators. The post-mortem report by Dr. Peter Ndwega detailed a ruptured uterus and extensive hemorrhage, classic hallmark of botched abortion, but noted no bruising, laceration or defacing wounds that would suggest a sexual partner inflicted violence. Investigators found needle punctures consistent with medical intervention and pegged a neck abrasion on later embalming, not strangulation or assault. 6 people arrested and charged. 3 clinic operators, Alexander Gitau Gikonyo, the alleged boyfriend, and Uber driver who transported Mwatha's body, and another intermediary. All faced count related to causing a woman's death by dangerous abortion and improper disposal of corpse, not murder. No homicide charges tied to a jealousy or revenge ever materialized, underscoring the prosecutor's viewing this as a medical legality matter, not a crime of passion. Moreover, the Independent Medical Legal Units and Amnesty International concurred that the medical evidence pointed squarely to abortion complications. They publicly decried unsafe backstreet procedures and lobbied for legal reform to protect women's health, arguing that when safe legal abortion is inaccessible, tragedies like Mwatha's proliferate rather than personal vendettas. Their statements never alluded to an affair-driven motive, instead framing the case as emblematic of system failure in reproductive health care. Family members, however, refused to accept that narrative uncritically. They highlighted anomalies: Caroline's phone pinged cell tower days after her presumed death, and an abdominal cut they believed inconsistent with standard abortion injuries and demanded an independent autopsy. Yet even these suspicions stopped short of accusing Gitau of intentional harm. They pointed more to mistrust of state authorities and circumstantial handling of her body than to an affair-based conspiracy. Public discourse splits along similar lines. Activists and legal experts saw the affair simply as the catalyst that led Caroline to seek a clandestine abortion, but not criminal intent. Others, particularly within her hometown, worried that powerful figures targeted her for her human rights work and used the affair narrative to deflect scrutiny. Court proceedings reinforced the medical complication thesis. During hearings, the prosecution focused on clinic malpractice and sterilized tools, lack of trained personnel, and negligent aftercare. Witnesses described Caroline's screams of pain and the operator's panic attempts to patch a perforated uterus, details entirely consistent with the post-mortem. Defense counsel for Gitau argued he merely provided funds and had no hand in the clinical aspects, an argument the judge found credible given the absence of evidence suggesting he knew of or intended lethal outcomes. So, did the affair go wrong? Only insofar as Caroline found herself pregnant, fearful of stigma or legal consequences, and turned to a murky network promising discretion. But the records show no betrayal, abandonment, or escalation from affection to aggression. Gitau's role was financier and confidant, not assailant. What went disastrously wrong was the unregulated setting, the non-medical practitioners, and the absence of safe, lawful abortion access factors beyond anyone's romantic partner's control. In sum, the balance of credible evidence points away from an affair-turned-violent vendetta and firmly towards a medical tragedy born of unsafe procedures. Caroline's relationship with Gitau facilitated her decision to terminate her pregnancy, but it did not morph into a lethal betrayal. Her death galvanized calls for reproductive health reform and lives on as a cautionary tale about the lethal risks women face when safe services are out of reach, rather than a story of passion-fueled violence. 6 individuals were arrested on February 14, 2019 in the wake of Caroline Mwatha's disappearance and subsequent discovery of her body at Nairobi City Mortuary. DCI detectives detained Martin Mwangi and Godfrey Otieno in Dandora, bringing the total in custody to 8 over the course of the investigation. These initial arrests targeted anyone suspected of involvement in what was at first treated as possible homicide, ranging from a clinic staff to personal acquaintances, pending a clearer medical and forensic pictures of Mwatha's cause of death. Within days, police zeroed in on 6 primary suspects: Becky Akinyi Nyanya, clinical owner; Hassan Richard Del Ramoya, a purported doctor; Michael Onchiri, Caroline's boyfriend Alexander Gitau Gikonyo, friend Georgia Tabitha Achieng, and an Uber driver who transported her body to the mortuary were all charged in late February 2019. They faced counts of murder, specifically for the alleged killing of Caroline and her unborn fetus and improper disposal of corpse. Prosecutors relied on witness statements and physical evidence from the makeshift clinic to justify these grave charges. By early May 2019, the nature of charges and the number of suspects held in custody had shifted significantly. On May 3rd, a Milimani High Court judge granted bail to 4 of the accused: Akinyi, Ramoya, Onchiri, and Gitau on a cash bail of 300,000 Kenyan shillings or bond of 500,000 Kenyan shillings with sureties, ordering them to stay away from the New Njiru Community Center, the alleged crime scene, and to refrain from interfering with witnesses. The prosecution had argued that release risked witness tampering and flight, noting one suspect already at large, but the court found no compelling reason to keep them detained pending trial. As pre-trial proceedings unfolded, forensic evidence reoriented the case's trajectory. A government post-mortem report established that Caroline died of exsanguination, severe blood loss from a uterine perforation incurred during an unsafe abortion procedure, with no signs of foul play beyond those procedures-related injuries. Investigators recorded needle marks consistent with medical intervention attempts and ruled out strangulation or assault when a neck abrasion was traced to an embalming mishap. This finding undercut the murder narrative, prompting prosecutors to amend charges from homicide to counts of death by dangerous abortion and improper handling of her remains. During bail and preliminary hearings, the defense for each accused insisted on lack of intent and absence of malicious action. Alexander Gitau counsel maintained he merely provided financial assistance of 6,000 Kenyan shillings for the clandestine procedure and had no operation role. The clinic operators argued that the fatal outcome was an intended complication of a medical procedure gone awry, not a deliberate act to harm Caroline. George Tabitha and the Uber driver, initially denied bail, remained in custody as the court weighed evidence and awaited further disclosure. 2 of the original 8 suspects were later turned into state witnesses, further narrowing the field of those standing trial. The prosecution's pretrial dossier leaned heavily on expert testimony and documentary proof. The post-mortem reported by Dr. Peter Ndegwa, clinical registration inquiries confirmed the New Njiru facility was unlicensed, and mobile phone text logged between Caroline and Gitau that outlined her distress and his monetary transfer. Witness depositions recounted panicked clinic staff attempting to manage uncontrollable bleeding, consistent with posterior uterine rupture. Prosecutors framed the case around negligence and malpractice in an illicit medical setting rather than in personal malice. Meanwhile, Caroline's family and human rights groups continued to press for deeper scrutiny. They commissioned independent pathologist reports, disputed timelines of her disappearance versus recorded time of death, and publicly decried any suggestions that her death was solely a medical accident. Activists called for full disclosure of police records and autopsy materials, alleging potential cover-ups given Caroline high-profile work documenting extrajudicial killings. These demands, however, are yet to lead to additional criminal charge or reopen the possibility of a murder count. As of mid-2025, the case remains in the pre-trial and evidentiary phase. No final verdict has been handed down, and no convicted murderers have emerged, nor have any abuse of office or obstruction of justice charges been laid against investigators. The court still sides with examine witnesses, cross-examine experts, and argue on whether the clandestine procedures risks equate to criminal negligence under Kenya's law. The High Court must now schedule substantive trial sessions to hear detailed medical and technical evidence, evaluate the credibility of state witness testimonies, and resolve whether the accused actions satisfy the mens rea, criminal actions or intent, or amount solely to culpable negligence. This ruling will have implications beyond this case, potentially shaping Kenya's jurisprudence on reproductive health law, the criminality of unsafe abortion procedures, and the intersections of women's rights and medical negligence statutes. Caroline Mwatha's case exposed the deadly consequences of unsafe abortions and the legal gray zone surrounding reproductive rights in Kenya. What began as a murder probe shifted to charges of medical negligence and body disposal. While no one has been convicted of intentional harm, the trial underscores systematic failures that force women into dangerous situations. Caroline's death is more than a legal case. It's a sobering reminder of the urgent need to safer regulated reproductive health care and justice that protect both life and dignity. Her fight did not end in that clinic. It lives on in every call for reform. And this brings us to the end of Caroline Mwatha's story, a tale of courage, silence, and a system that failed one of the boldest defenders. Her death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was the loud echo of nations' unresolved war with reproductive rights, legal hypocrisy, and the cost of speaking truth to power. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, don't just scroll past. Like, comment, and subscribe to Dark Echoes. Your engagement helps us bring more of these untold stories to light. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop asking the hard questions.